DeFi by Design, where we talk all things blockchain and cryptocurrency while striving to educate, empower, and enrich.
What is up? Welcome back to the Rollup. Very special episode today. We are welcoming the gigabrains behind Celo, and we're going to be talking all about the upcoming transitions that Celo has planned. This is episode 107 of DeFi by Design, and we are very, very grateful to have 𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗵 and Tim on the podcast today. We're gonna let them introduce all of the exciting updates that are happening over at Celo. You may have recognized Celo as the ecosystem, the network that has some of the top DeFi applications right now. And there are tons of exciting updates that we will get into in a moment. I will kick it over to 𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗵 for a bit of an intro about himself and a touch on the upcoming updates and announcements coming through Celo. 𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗵, before we kick it over to you and Tim for intros and diving in, Andy, of course, on the podcast as well. Andy, how you feeling today?
And I got my 𝗲𝗵𝗶𝗵 shirt on. We're bridging cross-chain, baby. Every day of the week is what we do. We're here today to talk about some of the roll-up wars, as I like to call it, and where these two lads are going to position themselves, some of the unique kind of propositions of Celo, kind of the history. And yeah, let's just dive right in. So yeah, GM sirs, Tim, why don't you kick us off and give us a brief intro as to what you guys are building and a bit about the kind of current move.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So I'm Tim. I'm CEO at 𝗃 𝗃 is one of the organizations active in the Celo ecosystem. We do a lot of the product and engineering work. We've been contributors to Celo since before mainnet. Yeah, I'll just quickly pause to give Marek a chance to give a quick intro over here.
Hey everyone, yes, my name is 𝗵𝗶𝗶𝗵𝗶𝗃. I'm one of the co-founders of Celo, and yeah, also CTO at 𝗃 where, as Tim just mentioned, all of the public goods development happens, or a good amount of the public goods development in the Celo ecosystem happens. Yeah, over to you, Tim.
Yeah, so I think there's a little bit of background to this. This is kind of my version of it. I'm curious to hear Marek's as well. But you know, when the team working on bringing Celo to mainnet were kind of thinking about how to put together all of the pieces that we were looking to deliver. You know, Celo started out as this peer-to-peer payments app, you know, almost like a kind of Venmo for crypto. This idea that you can send money to a family member the other side of the world, and that person can then walk around the corner into a store and buy groceries with that. And crucially, that all of this would be done using low-end smartphones that were just like at that point back in 2018, just completely prevalent, and of course even more so now. And there are more people out there with smartphones than have bank accounts. And that kind of realization that that you could use smartphones as a key way of being able to like close this gap between you know, financial inclusion, financial access for so many people was just kind of really powerful. And crypto was like an incredible and empowering technology from that point of view. But for Celo to as a kind of project to be able to reach that vision, you know, we were trying to build like a crypto wallet, a stable coin framework, an identity framework so that you can like send money directly to a mobile phone. We were like, you know, looking at like all of the kind of pieces of the puzzle. And in order to make this thing work, we would obviously need like a blockchain. And the first thought, of course, was, you know, Ethereum was at that point like already like a dominant player in the space. We love what the Ethereum project was doing. We just subscribed to so many of its values. A number of the team had worked on Ethereum projects already. But in order to kind of meet the needs of this payments use case, it was kind of just like in its current state back in 2018 was just not going to really cut it, because with reorgs, with high transaction fees, with slow block times, having to hold a different currency to pay for like gas if you were like trying to make a stablecoin transaction. All of these things we felt were like barriers to usability. You know, you want to be able to stand at a register and see your transaction for like $10 or the equivalent go through and be kind of finalized, and for the fee to be modest, and for you not to like have to hold a different currency in order to pay those fees at the same time. And it was because of those kind of needs that we, in the end, to like launch, you know, as the code base that ended up being launched by validators in the community as Celo mainnet, in order to like achieve that kind of those needs, the developers forked Ethereum to the 𝗀𝗶𝗴𝗵 Golang client to be able to get there. And so Celo has always been like kind of wanting to be part of Ethereum. If we could have avoided like building a separate Celo blockchain in the first place, I think maybe that could have been in the past the preferred route, but that option was never really available back in 2018. And so, you know, we've been tracking like lots of developers in the Celo ecosystem are also developers in the Ethereum ecosystem. Like Celo is fully EVM compatible. Like we as an ecosystem were early to like invest in bridging, and lots of the developer tools and DeFi apps that you get on Celo and Ethereum are very, you know, they're shared. There's like shared team, shared heritage. And I think, you know, it's been super exciting this year because the emergence and the maturity of L2 like stacks now is at a point where we can kind of see a route towards Celo like coming home to Ethereum. And this is where I feel like, you know, that just wasn't the case like 12 months ago. And that's what led us to May and to start really doubling down on this idea that we wanted to propose to the Celo community, hey, how about if like Celo became an L2 on Ethereum, preserved as many of its values, its community, like the experience, the apps for users, for developers, for builders, but gained a ton more from like a closer synergy of those communities.
Yeah, I still remember going on Celo and DeFi summer-ish. There were some incentive programs with Sushi Swap. Bridging over there, getting active was probably like the first or second day. You know, it was just kind of another place you could go get rid of the kind of high fees, slow throughput, and kind of had those nice incentives attached. You know, and I always knew of you guys through kind of some of the agencies that you were working with, some of the PR, and just through experience, I had known that you guys were pretty like mobile first. I think we can touch on the move into the L2 and kind of the state of the Rollup wars and the hard fork in a short time. But I'm just kind of curious if your mental model for the way that DeFi scales is still lies within this mobile first experience. Like I think this idea of like these PWAs, which is basically like these progressive web apps for those who are listening, basically taking these web apps onto the mobile phone. I think FriendTech is obviously a huge example of that now. But yeah, I'm curious if your thinking has shifted with regards to the mobile side of things, seeing that was kind of like the biggest focus for you guys in the early days. And if you still think that like DeFi and crypto and is kind of headed towards a more mobile first experience still, or if it'll be kind of, you know, more on the computer and desktop focused.
Yeah, we're equally excited about mobile, and we continue to invest in mobile. We think that for just a whole manner of reasons, mobile Web3, mobile DeFi is just going to continue to grow and grow and be definitely take a bigger market share of Web3 in general, but certainly be a huge driver for a global adoption of Web3. I mean, just if you look at the numbers, there's 7 billion smartphones out there in the world, significantly more than there are desktop and laptop computers these days. And if you look at the markets where crypto adoption has been growing during this bear market and the types of use cases that are driving that adoption, they tend to be in markets dominated by mobile users and use cases that tend to be mobile first. And so one exciting example. So I work also part-time at a wallet company called 𝗵𝗆𝗶𝗵𝗵, which is a really easy to use mobile wallet that leverages a lot of the features that Celo has to offer. You can use it to send value to people in your contact list. You can pay for gas with stable coins. It's 100% a mobile first experience that really, I would say, delivers on that vision that Tim was mentioning before, that kind of global Venmo use case that we were working so hard on 4 years ago, 5 years ago now. And so that's a really exciting, I would say, example of companies delivering on this mobile first vision. But recently, there's also been another player to enter the space that's pretty exciting. So Opera, the browser company, recently added a Celo only stablecoin focused mobile wallet to Opera Mini. Opera Mini is a browser that is very light in terms of its size. They have 100 million users, predominantly throughout Africa. And they launched MiniPay, which is very similar to 𝗵𝗆𝗆𝗃. It's a payment product built on crypto rails that lets you send stable coins to people in your contact list very, very cheaply. And it's also compatible with 𝗵𝗆𝗆𝗃. You can send money between both. And that's, super exciting. I mean, I think Opera is a massive company. They have a huge user base. There's a huge need throughout Africa to be able to send stable value easily throughout the continent. And again, that's where, there's a lot of mobile users. And so the platform, and the whole ecosystem, I think, continues to really work hard on building functionality that enables mobile developers to really execute well. And I think that will continue going forward for sure.
Yeah, I think I see the vision. And even looking kind of anecdotally at like how much time I spend on my computer versus how much time I spend on my phone, I would say it's relatively similar for me. And I imagine that I'm one of the higher usage on desktop. And for the most part, people around the globe are probably mobile heavier as far as how they balance. Even those who do own desktops are probably spending much, much more of their time on mobile phones. So
totally. And maybe just to throw a stat that you might find entertaining, 60% of people report that they use their mobile phone on their toilet, which is, I think, is really, says something about us as humanity. And I think specifically it says that 40% of us lie.
Yeah. I mean, I'll be the first one to admit I was on the toilet earlier today and I was on my mobile phone. So yeah, I'm part of that stat. Okay, so switching gears here a little bit to look into some more of the on-chain dynamics. Celo has capitalized on the mobile first movement, and now you have 𝗵𝗆𝗆𝗆 as well as Opera Mini and others that are running on top of the Celo blockchain. So getting into the transition into an Ethereum-centric rollup, how does this transition underpin the message that you guys are sending to the world that you are mobile first, you're here for speed, and you're here for adoption? How did you incorporate some of those ideas into the decision to become an L2?
Yeah, it's a really great question. And I really like those 3 bullets. They align very, very closely with a lot of our focus. I think, as Tim mentioned, our origins were in Ethereum, and philosophically we're very aligned with the Ethereum ecosystem. And we didn't really have an opportunity to execute on our vision back when we started in any other way other than creating an alt-L1. But now that there's an Ethereum rollup roadmap, there's all this work that's been done on rollups, really more philosophically than anything else. We have a desire to transition Celo from, or we at 𝗃 had this desire, which we then put forward as a proposal, and then the community voted on it, to transition Celo into an L2, just to be aligned with the Ethereum roadmap, just because, again, we philosophically agree and have our roots in the Ethereum ecosystem. But that doesn't mean that we wanted to launch as an L2 with all the same features that everyone else has. I think there's a lot of things that make Celo unique and differentiated, and we wanted to preserve many of those things. And so, in the proposal, we had three main goals. I think the first one was to maintain cheap gas fees for a lot of the use cases on Celo. There's people using it for payments, people using it for community currencies, for microfinance, for universal basic income, for mobile DeFi. And a lot of these use cases and a lot of our users kind of required really cheap transaction fees. And so we needed to preserve that. And so that ultimately meant that we had to look for an alternative way of doing data availability. But because we wanted it to be very Ethereum aligned, we ended up zeroing in on EigenDA, which is a middleware by EigenLayer, which, as you guys know, and as I'm sure your listeners have heard before, is a service run by Ethereum validators. And so we really like the Ethereum alignment of that. And so we've been working with the EigenDA team now, or the EigenLayer team now, to create this data availability layer. So that's kind of requirement number one. Requirement number two was to maintain decentralization. Celo has been running for 3 years with a decentralized network of validators that include, companies, some really great companies with really great production and DevOps experience, and a whole bunch of really great solo stakers that have, in some cases, been with the network since before it was even live as a mainnet, back when all the testnets were running. Of the big companies, we have folks like Google Cloud, which recently joined, Deutsche Telekom, which owns T-Mobile in the US. They've been in the ecosystem for a while now, contributing in many ways, including running validators, and many other big companies, the Coinbases, the Binances, the Anchorages, and all of that. And we didn't want to just throw away this validator set and just move to a centralized, sequencer on one machine. We felt that would be a step backwards. And so one of the big topics right now in L2s is decentralized sequencing. And so we worked hard to create a design that would allow us to transition that decentralized validator set into a decentralized sequencer set, preserving all of that decentralization and offering better liveness guarantees than L2s today. And so that was requirement number two. And then the third requirement was around one block finality. When you have a blockchain focused on ease of use, on payments, on payment-like use cases, one block finality becomes, I would say, more important than for other use cases. Whenever you're interacting with the real world, say you're buying something like a physical object, not an NFT, having a reorg means that only one of those two transactions gets undone. If you're buying an NFT, then both of the transactions would be undone, and so it's actually less of an issue. But as soon as you're interacting with the real world, it becomes much more of a concern. And so we worked really hard to create a design that actually preserves Celo's one block finality, which we offer through crypto token economic kind of incentives. And so the new design basically for the L2 provides Ethereum level security when you wait 12 minutes for Ethereum finality, but Celo level security on kind of the sub 5-second time frame for as well. And so if you're doing a smaller transaction where you don't really need Ethereum security, then you know that that transaction won't be reorged. If you really are sending a huge amount of money, then maybe you'll wait 12 minutes to get that Ethereum security for Ethereum 𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗵 level security.
Would you consider that like a hybrid design, or in the world of ZK, like ZK rollups, optimistic rollups, and different hybrid designs that I've done some research on as a recent, how would you kind of classify that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think already many L2s are doing something like this, right? Sequencers give you an attestation that they will sequence your transaction. The difference with the Celo design is that you're adding some economic security there, right? It's not just, like a promise by some company. There's actually, over 100 companies that are effectively giving you that promise, but also putting up a stake that can get slashed if they ever break it. And so I think in some ways it's just the kind of evolution of what is happening today for many L2s.
Right. Yeah, we can. I mean, another way of looking at it is we can take the fact that Celo has been running as a like all L1 with like almost 100% uptime for several years now on a really like strong validator set with like cast iron kind of operational practices and security, and be able to take all the benefits of that and like add in on top of that just this incredible economic security that Ethereum offers. And so what you get, hopefully, if we kind of execute on this well as a community, is like the most decentralized but also lowest cost like L2 in the Ethereum ecosystem. And the way that you get that kind of security, you get all those benefits is like through this kind of layering of like immediate finality, nothing's going back within 5 seconds, to the tune of the kind of economic security in Celo. And then on top of that, like if you're prepared to wait, or you feel like you need to wait, like the economic security of Ethereum.
And a validator set for Celo is providing consensus. I'd like to kind of just flush out this understanding, and then hopefully it illuminates the architecture of Celo, and that can we can kind of all better understand rollups as well as the audience. So my understanding of these validator sets is it provides consensus to the network. And Ethereum has its own validator set, which is now proof of stake, and everyone can stake. If they have 32 ETH, they can stake these in Ethereum validators and contribute consensus to the network. Is consensus a unique feature of Celo that other rollups such as Arbitrum, Optimism, because they rely on they use Ethereum's gas token? My understanding is that Arbitrum and Optimism don't have their own consensus, whereas it sounds like Celo does. Is that true?
Right. So Celo is an L1 today, and will transition to an L2 with a decentralized sequencer tomorrow. And so for both of these, you need consensus. And as Tim mentioned, we have the fortunate position of being able to reuse our production grade consensus protocol that's been running in production rock solid for the last 3 years. The Arbitrums and the Optimisms are all moving in this direction as well. In order to have a decentralized sequencer, you need consensus around your decentralized sequencer nodes as to what the next transaction bundle is. You don't have to have consensus about the the state of executing those transactions, but I think just agreeing on the fact that that will be the next transaction bundle is something that you can achieve consensus on. Folks like Espresso are working on this as well. There's a whole, I would say, this has become a really interesting research topic, and something that a lot of folks are now looking into. And it's certainly the direction that all L2s will go eventually, and we're just excited to be at the forefront of it.
And picking up on like this transition to this architecture, you and almost an adaptation of the question that Andy asked earlier about this hybrid model, and it is the consensus that you guys you're using the Ethereum consensus to provide the ultimate security on chain. And then you also are layering in another layer of decentralization and consensus with Celo's validators. And that's, to me, that signals the hybrid architecture. Whereas, okay, and I see some nodding heads, so I take it that is kind of the hybrid model where you're able to combine the Celo consensus for greater economic security on top of Ethereum's validator network, which provides Ethereum and Ethereum-centric architectures their own level of security. So does this unlock? I think you did mention a few features this unlocks. One of them intuitively sounds like greater economic security, more like stronger consensus around what the next transaction is. What are other features that this hybrid model unlocks?
Yeah, I think fundamentally shorter block times with economic security, not just with some company claiming that they won't reorder these transactions or exclude them in the future. So that's number one. And number two, the some economic finality that you can rely on to know that that transaction will, once it's in an L2, unsafe block, to borrow the vernacular of OP stack, it won't be, that unsafe block will eventually get promoted to a safe block, and it won't be reorged.
Got it. Cool. And I'm glad you bring up OP stack because I think that's kind of a next direction to go into. So Celo yesterday is an alt L1. Tomorrow will be an L2. So there's a transition that takes place, and that means developing and building. And there are there's several solutions out there to deploy new rollups, or it sounds like migrate existing L1s into L2 rollups. So what is the infrastructure stack that Celo is choosing to leverage to make this transition?
Wait to see who's going to go. So I guess that's a pretty exciting question. Funny you should ask that. So the original proposal that we as C Labs wrote, tackles this question, right? So one of the things that we really wanted to do was make this proposal to the Celo community: hey, we should become a L2 rollup on Ethereum. Really concrete, was to kind of sketch out like an implementation plan on how to do that, right? We didn't want this to be taken in any way as just like marketing. And we're big fans of the OP stack. We're big fans of, to be honest, we're big fans of like the work that Optimism and Arbitrum have done. Both projects have done, like blazing the trail here. But from a kind of openness point of view, from the kind of enthusiasm and willingness to like kind of collaborate and like shape the future of a project, I think the OP stack kind of stands out there. And I think it represents, from the kind of C Labs initial proposal, that was like, I think the the kind of route that we propose that we go down in order to take Celo forward as an L2. You know, what's super interesting, of course, is like this space is advancing so quickly that like even in the few weeks since we put that proposal out, since like we kind of unveiled it at ETHCC, and the Celo governance process and community decided to take that forward, we've like seen advances in the space and like new projects and like new things emerge.
Yeah, and so I think that's been really interesting. I think after we put out the OP stack based proposal at ETHCC, we got a lot of inbound from a lot of different projects saying, hey, you know, have you looked at our stack? A lot of ZK EVM based projects, I would say, reached out. And, you know, many of these projects are continuing to either release or launch or, you know, upgrade their stacks. And in some cases, the latest work that they're working on isn't always public. And so I think that was pretty interesting to hear from these folks. But ultimately, you know, Celo is a decentralized project. 𝗀 is just one party in the ecosystem. And, you know, to a large extent had already done a lot of research and kind of made a call. And so I think ultimately what we've seen is these projects wanting to have those conversations in the open with the whole Celo ecosystem. And so, you know, we've seen, for example, Polygon has posted to the Celo forum fairly recently and started engaging with the ecosystem about, you know, having Celo transition using Polygon CDK as part of kind of the Polygon 2.0 vision that they're working on. And it's been really interesting seeing those conversations pop up and hearing about some of the offerings that Polygon has that, you know, could potentially offer an alternative path for Celo to migrate. And so I think it's a fun, you know, interesting time. I would not have predicted this at all. You know, and I think our job at 𝗀 is to help the ecosystem navigate this in a way that is as fair as possible to all the different projects kind of coming to the ecosystem. And ultimately that results in I think the best outcome for the Celo blockchain and the Celo ecosystem. You know, I think we think that, you know, ultimately that's really important. And so, yeah, it's going to be, you know, interesting to see how this plays out. If, you know, any of your listeners have any viewpoints, you know, I would highly encourage you to kind of join the conversation and jump on forum.celo.org and you know, continue the conversation.
Yeah, we were messing around before about being the hot girl in the room, and that's kind of where you guys are at. It's funny to see like the proposals come up, and I think from an incentive point of view, these rollups as part of this rollup war that I'm pushing, there's two kind of sides. There's how do we attract the users, which is going to be a question that you guys will be faced with after your kind of transition. It's always a question that you've been faced with, right, during past times, current, and future. But even you know, furthermore, there's going to be more and more rollups launched. So it's going to be how do we attract the users? How do we get sticky liquidity? How do we get people that kind of want to use this as a home base? And that's a whole nother conversation. But then there's also these kind of stacks that just have projects like Celo that want to become a rollup, and like, what is their kind of pitch? You know, and I'm kind of curious from, you know, from that perspective. I guess a lot of it is on the forums there. You know, but I'm curious if there's been any sort of like key standout points. Like I'll give an example. There's this L2 called Mode, which is doing sequencer feed distributions to the devs which build on that chain, which is just an example of kind of like incentivization of these protocols and teams. So I'm curious on that front, and because my 𝗹𝗶𝗰𝗵-𝗾𝗀𝗋, I'm going to throw another one at you guys, which is is the economic model of a rollup very, very appealing when compared to the economic model of a proof of stake L1? If so, why? Or if not, kind of why not? So first, kind of like that kind of what are some of those like incentives, you know, to kind of that you may have seen or that you've heard of, and then kind of the economic model, is that a big push? You know, is that much better?
Yeah, I can take that. I think, you know, when it comes to attracting developers and users to the platform and growing network effects, you know, I think the L2 transition plan doesn't really change anything. You know, I think our strategy has always been to build a blockchain that makes it really easy for people to build applications that are accessible and easy to use by you know, a lot of people. You know, which again is why there's a big focus on mobile, and you know, we think that will continue to be attractive to developers, and we're going to continue to iterate and improve things on that front. And we think that the 𝗵𝗶𝗃 launch of, you know, 𝗵𝗶𝗃 with 100 million users, again, that they are this is not a new product that they're releasing that requires people to download and install a new app. This is part of an existing browser app that is installed on, I think, 500 million devices already, and you know, with over 100 million active users. And so that is a huge audience for dApp builders to get their dApps in front of. In terms of economic and the kind of token economics of the move, you know, it is interesting. You know, I think with a using EigenDA for data availability, I think makes the Celo L2 plan, I would say, result in a pretty small change in token economics. You know, right now, I think 90 to 95% of gas on most L2s is spent paying for data availability, right? Paying for that transaction to be then stored on Ethereum. That number will go down with proto-dank sharding, and will go down even more with dank sharding eventually. And you can think of EigenDA as effectively being dank sharding available, you know, 2 years before it might eventually roll out to Ethereum. And so our intention right now is, you know, obviously to eventually migrate to dank sharding. You know, once it's available, you know, I think that that's going to offer the best data availability, you know, and security for the L2. But absent of that, you know, we think that EigenDA is just an incredibly great option, given that it's bringing that technology to Ethereum validators and, you know, to users of the Ethereum ecosystem sooner. But ultimately means that, you know, that 95% transaction fee portion basically goes to almost zero, because it's just so much cheaper. And
yeah, I think Base is paying over 100K a day right now, I think, if I'm not mistaken, because of Friendtech, just to get all that data there. It's insane. And I think one other thing about the OP stack that you guys can take advantage of, if that's the route that you take, is eventually there'll be shared service model where, you know, all of the rollups on the OP stack should be sharing the cost of the sequencer. So they should have a shared sequencer, and they should share the data availability cost. So to a certain extent, like, it's almost a move to, if you can get more and more chains to kind of come onto the OP stack as the technology evolves for the shared cost model, it kind of helps everybody who's building there.
Definitely. Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things happening in the L2 landscape today is something that I think is orthogonal, but very related to the stacks that folks are using. And that's kind of these L2s kind of aligning themselves together and informing these types of alliances around their sequencers, but I think more significantly around their bridges and sharing liquidity in bridges as well. And it's obviously easier to do that if you share, or in some cases required to do that if you share the same stack. but ultimately you can share a stack and not be part of this as well. And so I think something that will be important for the Celo ecosystem to have a conversation around and to decide on is not just the stack, but also like looking a little further forward. What about these? What about a shared bridge? What makes the most sense for the ecosystem? Because that I think ultimately will translate into a whole bunch of additional functionality between those L2s in the future.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a super interesting and challenging kind of thought experiment to kind of project forward to figure out almost like which free trade zone do you want to be part of, right? And that has so many factors involved in it. You're kind of trying to make a bet on not only the technology, but also the success of the other L2s that have not even yet been created, that have not, on the applications that have not yet been built. And we know how quickly they can come up as per like Friendtech, right? Because they're ultimately what's going to be attracting users, attracting liquidity, and that rapid sharing of liquidity between those L2s in the stack is really very interesting. And of course, there are going to be a lot of network effects here. And I think Andy, your L2 stack wars analogy is potentially I mean, we're seeing a little bit of this, I think, with the DOP superchain and with the Polygon CDK. The Polygon team have put together a really, really compelling and interesting technology stack. I mean, they have a lot of expertise in the Validium space, and I think what they're proposing in the aggregation layer is very interesting and is hints at the kind of beginning of this kind of this liquidity, this bridge which rapidly moves liquidity between L2s and while minimizing the cost of running on Ethereum. And so, the OP stack has tons of potential here as well. And I wouldn't be surprised to see proposals like this from other players in the space as well, in general, as the kind of as the space emerges. But none of this was even stuff we were talking about 3 months ago, really. And so it's just evolving so fast. It's really exciting to see where it's going.
Yeah,
that's why I was curious about the incentives. Just are these guys offering who's money talks? Which ecosystem wants the users and the builders, and yeah, I think Rob had some.
Well, I was curious ultimately how the decision is made. It goes through community governance, and then in Celo, kind of what does that look like in practice, whether it's on Snapshot or Tally? We can all go to the forum and kind of check out those proposals. And then how is a decision made from there?
Yeah, great question. So Celo has built-in smart contract-based on-chain governance and has had since mainnet launch. It controls all aspects of the smart contracts deployed, all the core kind of protocol-owned smart contracts that are deployed on Celo. And that governance mechanism can also be used for kind of indicative temperature checks of Celo voters just by not attaching any kind of code execution to the proposal. That has been used by a bunch of folks in the community for a range of purposes before. And that's kind of exactly what we did after putting the forum post out for the L2 proposal. Of course, from a hard fork perspective, it's slightly different. Ultimately, any adoption of a major new stack like this is going to be a hard fork, and for that you need a quorum of 2/3 quorum of validators, or in this case, as the validators transition to becoming sequencers, decentralized sequencers, you'll need strong participation from that community as well to be able to have this done. But I would be, as with many Web3 communities, we've always tried to Celo as a grouping has always tried to operate with strong consensus, operations. We try to get buy-in as many folks in the community as possible, and you know, work things through so that everybody has kind of got general consensus around an approach rather than like, you know, forcing things through to like a token-based vote or like, you know, having validators make the decisions. So I think I suspect it would be like, you know, something that was done after a lot of discussion, agreement between like validators, like, you know, app developers, protocol developers, token holders, and you know, the whole constituency really. And yeah, you asked a question about incentives as well. I mean, like, again, this is totally new area, right? Like, you know, this is essentially one protocol suggesting that another community or protocol be adapted, right? And so like, what does that even look like from an incentive perspective, right? It's like, you know, it's kind of interesting, uncharted territory here.
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do you know, is there discounts on fees? Is there payments up front, token allocations, this, that, the other, dev resources, liquidity, you know, things like that. So I kind of want to posit us in a position where we are.
Just to add to that, one of the really nice things about having full on-chain governance with execution is that the governance participants effectively create a DAO that can hold the treasury as well. And so that also presents additional opportunities around incentives, right? There can be a grant that goes to the on-chain community fund that then can be governed by basically Celo holders, which I think is, you know, definitely pretty unique and interesting.
Yeah, and Optimism has a huge grants program, and other communities did too. And I mean, that the whole Arbitrum situation kind of got me on that incentive conversation with regards to incentivizing protocols with their users and kind of trying to get a little stimmy going for the Arbitrum ecosystem. Arbitrum was kind of like the only ecosystem for L2s there, and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, what's going on in Arbitrum? There's nothing going on anymore. Yeah, because there's freaking 69, 4,020 other L2s that have just launched in the last month, and everyone has a memory of a goldfish. But anyway, shifting kind of gears to a post-hard fork world. Today we're pre-hard fork. What does this post-hard fork world look like, seeing as the listeners are watching this Thursday or further? Kind of what's the difference between the hard fork world?
Yeah, and you know, for listeners wondering what hard fork Andy's referring to, it's the Gingerbread Hardfork that's happening on Tuesday, the 26th of September. So a few days after you guys, or a few days before you hear this. In our case, it will be tomorrow. Yeah, it's an exciting hard fork. It's the first of two hard forks that basically are part of this L2 transition. So you can think of this hard fork as really setting the foundation for the eventual hard fork that will transition Celo into an L2. So it's pretty exciting. But beyond that, there's also a whole bunch of bonus features. And so there's a lot of scalability work that also went in with this change, or with this hard fork. Celo will be able to process just shy of 900 transactions per second, which is no small feat for any EVM-based chain, and certainly within striking distance of our goal to get to 1K transactions per second really, really soon. So that will be exciting. There's also a really cool change happening. So Celo supported EIP 1559 since 3 years ago, before Ethereum adopted it. But the base fee has always gone to the community fund. Starting with this hard fork, 80% of that base fee will be burned, and 20% will go towards a green fund, as we're calling it, which is a contract that can convert those fees into carbon offset credits on chain, and then retire the carbon offset credits. And so you can think of this as resulting in every transaction that you post to the chain contributing to carbon offset credits being purchased and retired to help offset the carbon of the actual transaction itself. And this is already in addition to Celo using emissions to buy carbon offset credits. So speaking of on-chain governance, literally the first governance proposal that anyone brought to the community was to make Celo a carbon neutral platform 3 years ago and have it use emissions to buy carbon offset credits programmatically. And so it's been doing that for the last 3 years, and it's been carbon negative because actually it's bought more credits than we estimate the network has contributed to CO2. But with this change, every transaction will also have an impact, and so we're calling this ultra green money, inspired obviously heavily by Ethereum's ultrasound money, and so we're pretty excited about this as well. And then a whole bunch of other improvements around governance participation and again L2 related transitions. For anybody interested, definitely I encourage you to read the blog post we have about the release notes. It's going to be really exciting.
Nice, thanks, man. Yeah, that's awesome that you guys have been negative for that long. It shows a good faith effort to really just, what are we doing here on this earth, on this podcast, in this digital world, like, what are we doing? We're just trying to prolong life and make a better place. So big ups for that. As we kind of wrap up, I'm just kind of curious, like your mental model on this might take us for another world, but like we talked a lot about the optimism stack and kind of optimistic rollups being naturally more flexible and, a bit less restrictive than the ZK stacks and the ZK rollups that we see now, and really more conducive to actually like adopting, a ton of people on apps like FriendTech. But do you guys hold the belief that rollups will all become eventually ZK and that optimistic will be phased out? Or do you guys see a world where they both exist, hybrid models? Like, I'm just curious on what you guys think on the state of rollups, let's say 1 to 3 years from now. And then if you can, any way that you kind of have thought about this with your decisions with Celo as we kind of wrap up.
Tim, do you want to take this one?
Yeah, I wonder whether my answer is going to be the same or different to yours.
We should commit to an answer and reveal it together.
Yeah. No, I think it's, well, I'm generating now. I'm going to make a joke about that. So I think ZK tech is extremely interesting and very powerful, but also still extremely early in terms of we're beginning to see the first kind of practical evidence of like what this proving technology can do and like exploring some of the use cases for it. But it is still early from the point of view of like proof size, like edge cases, amount of computation or like dollars for actually creating these proofs, amount of gas on Ethereum in our case for like, in L2's in general's case for like actually verifying them, the amount of effort it takes to build the circuits in the first place, and it's like the specialization of knowledge. I think we're going to see as like the new proof families kind of emerge and the tooling improves. I think we're going to see just like a kind of explosion in the practicality of this stuff in a couple of years. But it is, I think, the Polygon CDK is making a bet on a bunch of this stuff. They have some very talented folks there working on it, but it is still definitely feels to me like early. So I guess the question was like, does everything end up there? I don't know, but I think like it'll be more stuff than not, probably. Just
yeah. And my take is everything will end up there. I don't know. I don't think it'll take a year. It'll probably take closer to 3 years. But if you think about security of L1s and L2s, right? One of the nice things about an L1 that's just a standalone L1 is that if you run a full node, you can verify every transaction and you know exactly what your balance is. You don't need to trust anyone. If you're in an ecosystem of chains using like client-based bridges, say like Cosmos, then you have to start trusting the other validator sets of all these other chains unless you run a full node for every chain that is communicating through IBC. And so that creates a bigger trust I think, requirement of you, and ultimately may not scale, which is why, Ethereum ultimately moved away from its sharded design and moved towards the roll-up centric model, which, under the optimistic design, only requires one honest party on every one of these chains, right? To be able to request a fraud proof or to submit a fraud proof. And so that's a huge improvement over kind of the like client-based bridging model. And then if you go to ZK, you don't even need to have that, right? As long as you trust the moon math and as long as there's no bugs, which I think is the biggest challenge today, then suddenly you can scale to, millions of L2s and not require everyone having to run a full node for all of them, right? Or even, anyone running them. And that's really elegant, especially when it comes to finality and the ability to transfer value between and send messages between these things. Not having to wait a week is really quite lovely. I'm hearing rumors that there are, optimistic designs that give you some of these benefits in the works, and I think they're
Fuel Approver. Fuel Network has a really cool one.
And I think ultimately they still, are going to use ZK tech, but in more of an optimistic design. But I still think that, ultimately ZK is just going to play a huge, huge role. There's still a lot of challenges to overcome, right? I think the circuits are big. It's hard to prove correctness. Zcash had a bug, right, in their circuit that actually allowed anyone to mint an infinite amount of money without anyone else knowing, right? Especially for the privacy-focused ZK EVMs, that's going to be a really, really big potential challenge. And then, of course, the fact that gas costs are different for proving than for running means that there's DDoS opportunities. There's a whole bunch of potential problems. And then, all of these systems are built on ZK prover technology from, around like a year or 2 years ago. And there's a whole new set of innovations happening right now around folding techniques, around supernova, that might unlock even more performance in the coming future. And so there's going to be new proving technology in the future. And then there's going to be an interesting question about how to migrate to all of that. I think in an ideal world, there'll be, one very, very audited, very high performance proving system that everyone adopts, and then they will create front ends around it. And in a very ideal world, those front ends will target ISAs of, like MIPS or RISC-V that will allow people to just to create proofs that are effectively just execution traces of existing code. Because I think that will make it much easier for everyone to adopt it. It won't require those cryptographers having to create these circuits every time there's an upgrade to Geth, right? I think, we've been around for, in production for over 3 years, and we've been tracking Geth and tracking mainnet Ethereum. That's a lot of work to keep pulling in these changes. If you have to create circuits for every change that's coming in, that can be, quite onerous. And so in an ideal world, folks won't have to do that. We'll just have high enough performance systems that can prove arbitrary machine code. Obviously, RISC-0 is working towards that, and, they've having some success with it, but I think the performance has to get a lot better in the next year or two for it to really go mainstream. But I'm actually pretty optimistic that will happen. I think talking to a lot of cryptographers today, the types of improvements in performance that they're predicting are actually really, really high. And so I'm really cautiously optimistic that world will happen sooner than later.
Nice. Yeah, thanks for the in-depth answer. It's been a pleasure, guys. I mainly asked that question because at /ETHCC, I was sitting in on a panel where it was co-founder of Metis was the moderator, and it was 3 ZK guys and Harry from Arbitrum. And the debate or the conversation started off quite civilized, and then within about 3 minutes, it was 3 ZK bullies ganging up on Arbitrum as to why they're basically going to fade into irrelevance in the coming years. And then there was the Arbitrum guy laughing away because his TVL is more than all of the combined ZK. And that takes us to the end of this one. So thank you guys for coming on.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This was a blast. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, great chatting.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.